Welcome everyone. If you don't know, I'm Tom Christensen. I'm the town manager. I've been asked to welcome everybody, and I appreciate all the enthusiasm around this process. I think we are always sort of floored by how much people are interested in what this all means and what we're talking about. So thank you everybody for being here. Councilor Richards, school committee member Greg Thompson is here also. Thanks to everybody again. I'll pass it over to our steering committee chair for further introductions.
All right, thank
you.
Thank you all for coming. We have a couple of we have a couple additional committee members here tonight. If you guys want to wave, this is kind of an informal talk. We've been doing these over the summer just to kind of keep the momentum going. If you guys have questions, we want to hear what they are, and then we'll resume the formal meetings probably in the next month or so. So I just wanted to first thank Rebecca for getting our wonderful speaker here tonight, and then I'm going to introduce Andre. I'm going to read from my phone because I do not have this memorized.
Don't read all of it.
So Andre is presently a consultant with Mass Inc. He supports community efforts to become more livable, welcoming, and thriving. A native of Worcester, he currently leads Mass Inc.'s Gateway Cities Innovation Institute, where he convenes a network of mayors, managers, and leaders from 26 municipalities. Today we're going to talk about smart growth and 40R. Do you want me to read your bio?
I'll tell people a little bit more about
I'm going to let you talk about it.
Okay.
But please feel free to ask questions at the end, and I hope you learn a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. And we have actually a bunch of seats up here. If anybody wants to come and sit down, please feel free. So, as Carolyn mentioned, my name is Andre Leroux. I've been working in kind of the community development field for a long time. I grew up in Worcester, and have been living in, I lived and worked in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and I've done a lot of work in some of our smaller cities around the state. I ran an organization called the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance for about 13 years, and while working there, did a lot of work with smaller towns and suburban communities about how to create more livable communities. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and we'll jump into it. I don't know, we'll see which way it goes. Thank you to Brew Practitioners for hosting this event. I should say that. It's I don't usually have a beverage before I give a talk, so hopefully I don't ramble too much. But so I know that you've already had some conversations about smart growth and some other discussions with other experts, and have done some work with PVPC. But basically, a kind of a classic conception of what smart growth is that you build more in some places so you can preserve other places, right? But even more than that, I tend to think that it's really about having choices, right? You want to live in a community where you don't just have one choice. You want to live in a community where you have different choices, because we all, during the course of our lives, our families look different, or might have kids, might not have kids, they grow up, your household can look very different at different times, and so you want to have an option to not have to move out of your community to be able to live your life fully in that community. It's also about having transportation choices, right? A lot of us, we need to have a car, but it would be nice to be able to get somewhere without having to have a car. And so, having places to walk to that are nearby can be a very nice amenity, even if it's just, a park or a post office or what have you. And that gets to this, the concept of convenient and walkable places, right? So having a grocery store nearby, having a pharmacy nearby, having some of the things that you need on a daily basis, not too far away, is what can be called, a complete community or a complete neighborhood. Sometimes they call it 15-minute neighborhoods, which just basically means that you could walk or drive within 15 minutes to get to all of your daily necessities. And an important component of that is the healthy, active lifestyle. So the way that we build our communities really shapes the way that we can live in that community. And so, if we live in a place where it's easy to get on a bike and there are bike paths, you're going to be more inclined to ride a bike. If you live in a place where there's no sidewalks, you're going to be less inclined to walk because you don't necessarily want, be walking right next to fast traffic. And then finally, this all adds up to having welcoming communities, right? And so that if you have choices in transportation, choices in housing, then you're going to be able to have a variety of people in your community. And I think that's very enriching. And I think many communities struggle with, my kids can no longer live in this community, for example, and they have to move out. And so you see in a lot of communities, especially smaller communities, you see a brain drain where kids maybe go to school in the Boston area or something, and then do they come back? Well, they might want to come back, but it might be hard because there's not really a lot of apartments around. Or you might be aging and you don't want to have a big house anymore to take care of. But there's not really a lot of options for apartments where you can kind of walk around. You still want to be in the community. So that's sort of the basic Smart Growth 101 in simple concepts. And now I'm just going to talk a little bit about, so who wants that product, right? Because you might say to yourself, well, you don't need to have all of that stuff. We're perfectly happy being in our community, and we have, nice houses with big yards, and why change? And I just want to show a little bit. So the National Association of Realtors, every couple of years, they do kind of a market preference survey of the American people to see where Americans are at. Where do they want to live? What do they like in their communities? And they look at this by generations. And they do see, for the most part, and again, these are generalizations, for the most part, baby boomers do prefer living in kind of single-family homes where they drive, right? They like having the space. But millennials, they wish that they could have more options, right, for getting around. I don't know why the millennials look so sad in this infographic. Yeah. Probably because they came of age during the Great Recession. And now, Gen Z, this is clearly a Gen Z designer who did these infographics because they are so happy. But interestingly enough, they're willing to spend more money and significantly more money on housing that is in a walkable community. So if you want to retain or attract younger people in your communities, you might have to think about creating places that are a little bit more walkable and convenient. Now I'm going to show a few slides that have lots of graphs, and you're not going to have to worry about that. And if you want, I will send the presentation along. You can kind of look at it later. But the top line here is that the most important amenity that comes up in the realtors' surveys is having proximity to shops and parks, right? And having sidewalks, places you can walk to, essentially, and walk safely. So we're talking about, 85% or more of people see that as very important or somewhat important. And even more interesting is that people who have those amenities like their communities better. They are more satisfied with their communities than others. And we see among younger people especially with Gen Z, but millennials as well, and you kind of see it as people get younger, this is more important, these amenities, and they are willing to pay for it. Now, even if you step back and you look at everybody as a whole, they ask about, do you prefer to have a house with a small yard and where it's easy to walk, or would you prefer to have a house with a large yard where you have to drive to places? And it's pretty split. People, half and half, just like the country on so many things. But we do see that in a trend where increasingly people are preferring to have smaller yards and drive less. I mean, I see this. I have, two kids, a 24-year-old and a 21-year-old, and my 21-year-old doesn't have a license. And despite, my mom panicking about him not having a license and urging him at every opportunity to get his license and not understanding why, because, when we were like 15 and a half, we got our permit and then we got our license. He has no interest right now. He lives in Providence to get a license. And so I do think you see this among younger people. They're just less interested. And he bikes around, right? He's a chef. He bikes around and takes an Uber when he needs to. But it's not just young people who like this. When you ask about this, you also see that some of our oldest residents also prefer this, which makes sense because they don't want to take care of a big house and a big yard anymore. And so they also, they don't want to be, nobody wants to be like tucked away. They still want to be part of the community, and they want to be in the middle of the action. They want to be able to see other people and be part of the community. This just reinforces here how, especially among younger people with Gen Zs, we really see a big jump here with Gen Z, is that they would rather be in an apartment or a townhouse with an easy walk and have a short commute to work than to have like a bigger single family house.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
What age is Gen Z? When does that start?
Yeah, good question. So I believe Gen Z is about, they're the folks who are young adults right now. So I would say it's probably about, like 18 to 32 at the moment, whatever that. Well, the millennials, basically, it's like 15-year chunks. I know the millennials are like turning 40. So, what's that? Yeah.
I'm just curious as to where they are in, work and in college. And, you have different ideas when you're younger than once you settle.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I think generally, like Gen Z, they are coming out of school, and they are coming into the workplace. They are starting to form families. I know Rebecca's going to help me out here.
12 to 27.
Mid to late 90s.
There's the college folks that are also entering the workforce for the first time.
Yes, but I would just say that for the purposes of, I'm sure they are not asking people, minors, these questions. So we're talking, it's the part of Gen Z that are 18 plus, right, to 27, I would say. Right, so 20-something-year-olds, post-college maybe, or college and post-college. And then if you look at renters, there's also very, very strong preference to, be in a place where there's stuff to do and there's amenities, and that's not really, a huge surprise. So I know that, this whole process is really about town center development. So I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of town center development right now. And this is just an absolutely shocking statistic that it's been discovered that social isolation causes as much health issues as obesity, smoking, and physical inactivity. It's incredible. And I took out some of the words that were in here, but the percentages are pretty amazing. We're talking about like a 50% increased risk of dementia.
And you bring that up for what reason? Is that some kind of issue we're having in this time?
I'm bringing up as a society, it's something that we have. The way we build our communities has a direct relationship to social isolation. So nothing particular about East Longmeadow. Yeah. But it is, it's important. So because on the positive side of things, I want to introduce the concept of social infrastructure, right, which is just connected communities. There's been a lot of talk about how our communities and our nation have fragmented over time, right? There's a very famous book called Bowling Alone that came out, 25 years ago that talked about how the decline of bowling leagues, for example, was kind of emblematic of the way so many of our kind of social institutions have fragmented, because rather than bowling in leagues, people were just, when bowling in their families or individually, right? And so then that kind of permeates like the entire culture. And so with connected communities, one thing is the way we build our communities really helps shape the way that we bump into people, we see other people, and hopefully, tie ourselves together better. And so social infrastructure can mean almost everything, right? It's parks and playgrounds, can be community spaces. It can be as simple as, steps in front of a house, front stoop, the front porch. It's also this concept of third spaces, some of you may have heard about. Basically, it's not work, it's not home, it's a place where people like to go and spend some time and see other people. I mean, basically, what most attracts people to a location is other people, right? So you see that all the time. If you ever go, you travel somewhere, it's like you want to see people. And so, again, all different kinds of ways that could be, cafes, could be a senior center, could be a market, an arcade, all different kinds of places. And a place I like to call, the stroll test, right? So do you have a place in your community where you can spend an hour or two without having to plan it out and actually do something, right? You just park the car and you walk around and you enjoy it. So a little bit about, what makes a place active and vibrant. There's just a few of the things that we've identified when looking at communities. So are the uses oriented towards people or cars? If you know that people are not connecting with each other when they're in cars. So if you're, there's basically a way you can orient. Are you building for parking? Are you building to maximize kind of like flow through of cars? Or are you building for to maximize walkability and the interaction of those people? The streetscape itself, how is it built? Is it active or inactive? Are there a variety of things to do? And are there civic spaces? And are they, welcoming or defensive? So, classically, a lot of times you see communities are, very concerned, let's say, about, homeless populations or something. And so they might build parks or public spaces in such a way to discourage people from, sleeping on a bench. But what it does do is it kind of discourages everybody from using that space, and the only people who end up using that space are the people who are kind of desperate enough to be in that space. And this just gets back to that same point. If you plan communities where you're really prioritizing the vehicles, then that's what you're going to get. Whereas if you're prioritizing the people spaces, you'll get places that are more enjoyable for walking. And these are kind of the classic two types of development we have, which is kind of like a drivable type of development and a more walkable type of development. And of course, for all communities, the question is really, it's not about growth or no growth, you don't have any control over that. It's really that's the economy. You know, we're growing, and people, communities will grow. But it's about, are you going to manage it, plan ahead, or are you going to let it happen haphazardly? So that gets to the point of smart growth districts. What are the tools that we have around town centers to create more of a town center? And I was asked to talk a little bit about kind of the Chapter 40R, which is a state law in Massachusetts that's called kind of the Smart Growth Overlay District law. And I don't know how much detail to go into the technical stuff, because that's really stuff that you guys can kind of read and study on your own, but I'll talk about just a few pieces of it. So there's a density component to adopting a smart growth overlay district, a 40R district. And these are the different densities that you can choose for different kinds of districts. So there's 8 DU is dwelling units, 8 dwelling units per acre, 12 dwelling units per acre, 20 dwelling units per acre. And these numbers and densities often sound scary, but this is just to give a sense of what that actually means. So at 8 dwelling units an acre, you're still talking about single family homes. At 12 units an acre, you're talking about maybe 2 to 3 family homes. And at 4+, you're talking about more kind of apartment complexes.
I just would stop you there.
Yeah.
8 dwelling units per acre is considered what?
It still can be.
Low, and they're getting single family homes, and 8 of them on an acre. So how big are these homes?
Well, they're smaller.
They are really small.
I'm going to show you an example a little later on here that
Okay.
maybe.
That's great.
Yeah, we'll come back. We'll come back to it. We'll see. It's a very interesting point. I get it. So, and some of the elements of the 40R districts, and again, this is just like state law, so I'm just kind of summarizing some of this. The idea behind doing a 40R district is that it creates predictable permitting for developers, and it's for the community. The community is basically saying, here are the rules that we want to get a certain kind of design. So you can have, so once you put those rules in place, then it's a very streamlined process for the developer, because they know they can come in and this is what you want. You said you wanted this, you've created the rules, and so this is what we can do. And so it's beneficial for them, saves them time and money. And for the community, it's beneficial because you're saying ahead of time what you want and what you're going to get, rather than sort of like react to what are the ideas that people come up with. You got a property owner all of a sudden says, I want to like do this thing, and you're like, well, I don't know. It goes to the board. Should we do it? Should we not do it? This is a different way of doing it. So it does include an affordability requirement. You can't like restrict it in terms of age who can live there. It can be mixed use, so you can have sort of first floor retail with residential on top. Just yes.
Does 40R have to be in a certain zoning district? Can it be residential or industrial, or we pick it, or do they pick it?
Yeah, there's basically 3 criteria, and I didn't put it up here in the slides, but it can be either sort of a transit-oriented district, which probably wouldn't be around here. It could be what's called a highly suitable area, which could be around here. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility in how they do it, but it's basically, the fact that you want to have more of a town center and strengthen your town center, I would basically be a highly suitable location.
And does 40R have to get any involvement in picking who the developer is for the land, or is still the person who owns the land?
Yeah, still the person who owns the land. Yep. It's just sort of a set of rules. And importantly, it's not just about the streamlining process, but in addition to the zoning changes itself, communities can adopt a set of design guidelines, right? And I would recommend that if you were to use this, because the design guidelines can be simple or they can be like very sophisticated, but that's where you can really lay out what you want developments to look like, and some of the features. So this is just a local, example of a 40R community. This was a 16-acre mixed-use district on the old Northampton State Hospital site, and to turn it into something that was a little bit more of a community-friendly.
How many floors is that, sir?
I'm sorry, what was that?
How many floors is that?
Oh, yeah, it looks like 3 floors with, roofs, 3.5. I don't think there's usable space up there.
So the bylaws would indicate how many bedrooms per unit?
Yes, although you can't really restrict too many because I think that the state does want to encourage, family housing as well because there's a real need for like 3-bedroom units. So I think they generally like to see, 10% of the units be 3-bedroom. Yeah.
Question over.
Yes, sorry.
Hi. I'm going to stay on the stool because I don't think I can get back up here. Okay, you mentioned design guidelines.
Yes.
What about zoning, the zoning that we have in place? Does this project bypass our local zoning?
It would be an overlay on top of that zoning, but it would take precedence, yes. So it would be a zoning change.
And I guess I'm struggling with this a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm Marilyn Richards, I'm on the council, was a former planning board person. A few years back, just prior to COVID, we adopted a very comprehensive mixed-use village district bylaw.
Yes.
And the whole time throughout that process, we kept saying, wow, this would be great if we could take a smaller version of this and incorporate it somehow within the town. But I don't think the numbers that we are looking at are even the 8 aggregate or the 8 units per acre.
Yeah.
It's pretty dense. I have concerns about that.
Yeah.
However, I do feel that a lot of what took place in that process prior to COVID was realizing that we were focusing on connectivity. We wanted to encourage pedestrian use, but the project was across town. And there's no rail to bring people back and forth. And we actually fought hard for 20 to 30% of non-residential use. And the project couldn't even come up with that. So we don't have a project. And you're talking about 40R, and that requires a certain element of commercial, business, non-residential piece. We still have vacancies. I just don't know how we can thoughtfully adopt something like this with the current economic situation.
Yeah. Well, 40R is really about the residential piece. Many communities, they want to have the mixed, first floor commercial, so it's allowed. But the rules are really about the residential piece of it. You can do 40Rs with just residential.
I'd like to add that when we went through the development of the town center with various retail offerings, we looked at pictures of trees and Currier and Ives scenes where people are walking in the streets. We have a mattress place. We have empty buildings. I mean, I'm not trying to be cynical. It's just that we have no control as a community. What ends up being, they want to fill the space, so they'll take whatever they can.
Yeah.
And it's not always in the best interest of the community. So I hope you understand my skepticism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not here as like a proponent of 40R. I'm here as an educator about 40R, really. I think that there's, and I should note, like, I'm not paid by the town or to come here and speak. This is just a volunteer speaking engagement. I did get a beer. That's full disclosure. And I'm going to pay for a lobster roll after. Yes, sir.
So I've got an updated question. So I know in the residential area you talked about 8 dwelling units per acre, which if you do the math, that's about 5,000 square foot. That's the maximum size that you can have, right? So in other words, you can have, instead of 8 dwelling units, 10 or 12.
Yeah.
Which would lower the square footage of the lot. Currently, our residential C, which is the smallest lot, is 10,000 square foot.
Yes.
So immediately we would be doubling that, but I guess my concern right now is the fact that the state just passed ADUs.
Yes.
And depending on how that happens, not only could we be looking at taking a lot that's half the size to put a house on, but then putting an ADU on top of it.
Yeah.
What is an ADU?
accessory dwelling unit. So it could be an attached in-law apartment, it could be a detached in-law apartment. I mean, there's all different ways of doing it. But again, so because the state passed this, is the state going to go back and look at the requirements of 40R and possibly make any adjustments accordingly?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I'm just curious.
Right, that's
like
my
said,
opinion.
yeah.
So just to repeat, because I forgot I was supposed to be repeating this for the purpose of the TV. The question is about how the state recently passed a law that allows, by right, which means you don't need to get a permit necessarily. There could be a review process, but you can't say no to it, that in every single family district in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, property owners have the right to put an accessory apartment in. And these accessory apartments, or ADUs as they're called, they're also called in-law apartments or granny flats or things like that. But basically, it's an opportunity to have a relative, although it doesn't have to be a relative. There's no requirement that it has to be sort of a part of the family. But anyway, so that's allowed. Now, ADUs can be built inside a home, or they could be what's called a detached unit, which is sort of like almost like a tiny home in the backyard, or it could be like a converted garage or a unit above a garage. So there's lots of ways that those could look like. So that is a pretty big change that just happened. But and that's something to take into account as you're thinking about incremental growth. I would say that I think that generally incremental growth is a good way to go. I think that nobody expects like East Longmeadow to turn into a tiny Manhattan or a tiny Cambridge or anything like that. But I think thinking about what is the kind of how you want to channel that growth that you're going to get anyways, and do you want that growth to be channeled in like cookie cutter, single family home development, or do you want to maybe kind of try to preserve more of your land and try to create some new options for people, maybe kids who want to come back home and live in an apartment, or an older person who wants to downsize?
So with 40R, you're talking about commercial use and single family use, but what about apartment use?
Yeah, so
That
I mean,
all part of it?
40R is just a tool that can be used to create an area of greater density. And so those different densities that I talked about,
Those look like apartments there in Northampton. I'm
Right,
sure
exactly.
They are apartments.
yeah, and I don't know exactly which density, how dense this is, but I think it's a 16-acre district, and I think they've built like 170 units or so there.
Only 2 cars.
What's that?
Only 2 cars.
I know, that's great. I'm sure there's more parking. Yes, sir.
Past meetings, I come to realize that there's going to be a mile radius around the rotary. Is that correct?
No, that's a common misconception. The maps that we've been using have been just to give you a sense of what types of uses, like when you look at this map, it's just giving you a sense of what are the uses that are available. So you can see that there's a lot of purple in and around the center of town that's industrial uses, that's high intensity uses, and so what we're looking to do in some way is to create higher residential densities in those places where there are industrial uses at the center of town. And to Marilyn's point, when you have higher residential densities, you get a more robust economy. So you're able to fill your businesses because you have more patrons.
Okay.
And we've been learning a lot about that in the book club that we've been organizing at the library this past month.
Yeah.
I'm basically trying to put this jigsaw puzzle together, and you need a picture to do that. Does that mean like myself or somebody else that lives next door to me has an opportunity to expand their property to allow for mixed use, where you have apartments?
So
Is that what is part of this?
I'll just say that it's I think the question is, does this mean if you adopt a 40R district that uses will be able to be changed, right, in that district? And the answer is no. I mean, this is something that the town, you will go through a process. You would design a district if you would choose to adopt this. And, it can have the features that you want it to have. It can have the densities that you want it to have. There are certain pieces of the state law that are required, like there's kind of an affordability component so that you have a mix of incomes. And part of that is because there's also, I haven't mentioned that there's also an incentive payment to it, right? So when you adopt this, depending on the number of the amount of growth or additional units that could be built in this new zoning, the state pays the town a certain amount of money once you pass that zoning. And then once new homes get built and take out building permits, then the town would receive another $3,000 payment for each of those units that comes online and gets a permit. So that's part of the system. But no, it doesn't actually change the uses. I mean, unless it is to intensify the uses so that you can do more things, but that's part of what you as a town need to decide on, like where that growth is going to happen.
Anytime there's anomalies that are involved where that does happen, things that built on existing homes and all that. And some of the other bylaws that were passed, as if you don't follow those either, so. Anyway, that's.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe just because I think we do hit some of it. Okay. This again just gets some more images of the different densities that we're talking about here. So 8 units per acre, it can look different. It could look more like attached townhouses if you want to conserve more of the space, or it could look more like, cottages. Even at 12 units per acre, you can have it look like more traditional, housing in the community. So it depends. It's obviously the design is, yes, sir.
With 40R, the state law, correct?
Yes.
What?
But it's a local opt-in to the state.
If locally East Long Meadow opts in, what control do we lose? Can a developer come in and say, I like this parcel, I want to do 40R. I'm going to put whatever I want on it. It can be 4 stories, or do we still have control?
So 40R is very different than 40B. Thank you for that question. So 40B is basically where a developer can come in and say, I want to build so many units on this piece of property that I just bought, and as long as it has like 25% affordable units, then I can basically do a run around the local zoning and I can get approval from the state, right? And so 40R is not that. 40R is supposed to be an alternative to 40B that is more of a local opt-in and locally directed. So it doesn't come from the developer, it really comes from the community, and the community decides where it wants to grow. Because one of the big critiques of 40B has always been, well, oh, that's fine, we're not opposed to housing, but we don't want it there, 40R allows you to say, we want it here, and developers come and develop here. Yeah. So I'm going to say a few other things, and we'll come back to the 40R, because I know you have a lot of questions about that, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about, density and some of the implications of that as well. And this is just an example from Fitchburg, because this is what I have. And this is, I know you're not Fitchburg, but don't worry. It's just to illustrate a mathematical point. So here is an example of kind of a drive-up convenience store in Fitchburg, right? The value of this parcel of land is $325,000. It's not even half an acre. And the value of this, so the value per acre, $784,000. And why am I saying this? Is because it's important. This is how property taxes are raised, and this is where your town budget comes from, or your municipal budget comes from. And so many people think like this is great development, right? This is, you want to get like, you get a new store, you get a big box or whatever, that's great. It's gonna. But if you look at like the more classic Main Street part of Fitchburg, which is low income, has a lot of issues, and you look at this, it's only $194,000 for this piece of property. It's only 0.1 acre. But when you look at the value per acre, look at this. It is over 4 times as much as that convenience store, $1.7 million per acre. So the whole point of that, and this is in any community, it doesn't matter what size, it doesn't have to be a city, every town, but the point that I want to illustrate is that if for your town finances, right, if you want services and you don't want your property taxes going up, it behooves you to figure out where in your community you want to have some density, because that's where you're going to really maximize your, you're going to get more property taxes, right? And the more density that you have, then, I mean, the value per acre goes up geometrically, right? So that's the only point that I want to make, and that is in East Longmeadow and every other city and town in Massachusetts. So if you're concerned about town finances, and I know nothing about East Longmeadow's town finances, this is part of the conversation. Yes, sir.
So with that example,
Yeah.
you went a lot higher density, but typically when you do that, you create more open spaces, and are they actually taking that into account? Because if you, let's say, create 5 pocket parks and a 4-story apartment complex, yeah, maybe that 1/10 of an acre went up in value, but everything where the parks are went down. I mean, are they averaging that, or are you just looking at that one little slice?
Well, that's if, I mean, I don't know too many, like, I don't imagine a development creating 5 pocket parks. So I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, I think that when you have certain density, you have enough to be able to carve out, and a good design should have green space, you know, around any development. But the overall density, like we saw, is still there. So
I would tend to agree. It will go up, but I don't think at the same rates. I mean, that makes it look phenomenal, but I think that's the whole idea, is you create density so that you can have more green space. I mean, in most cities that I've been to.
But the green space, when I was saying at the very beginning, that classic trade-off of developing more in certain places so you can conserve other places, I think that what usually happens is that you're getting more property taxes in like the center of town and you have more resources to conserve key parcels of green space in other parts of the town. Yeah. So the only reason why I put this up there in part is because a lot of people associate apartments, for example, with cost to the community, increased services and school costs and everything else. And that's actually not the case. Apartments are positive revenue generators. And density obviously doesn't have to look the same in every community. This is in Florence, very attractive. And this is the example I wanted to come back to here that I wanted to show you. So this is Old Village Square in Medfield. And I don't know, I think that's pretty attractive.
Is that a 40R, sir?
It is, I don't think, no, it's not a 40R, but it could have been a 40R.
I don't know what that means.
It just means that the densities would have qualified it to be a 40R, but the developer just did it on his own.
But you're saying that's 1 acre.
It's not controlled.
So I'll show you the site plan in just a moment. So what this developer did, and this is just, you know, he was a local guy who wanted to, he saw that in his town there weren't a lot of starter homes. There weren't a lot of small homes for young families who to start off and purchase, you know, a home. And so little smaller, not like a huge place. And so what he did was he bought along a state road, right? So there's plenty of traffic going along it, but there's driveways and houses going right onto that. So it was kind of a dangerous situation too, with people coming out right into this busy traffic. And he bought 7 homes. They were each an acre lot, so 7 acres, 7 homes, and he turned it into this, which was like a little town square. Basically, he was able to create a park in the middle, or a little common, and houses around it. And different styles. I think he did a very nice job, actually. He wanted to make it look like a neighborhood from the beginning. And so here's the site plan. So the 7 original homes were here, along this street. And to improve the safety, basically created an entry, here, just 2 entries to it, no driveways along the road. And these 7 homes became 44 homes. And you would not think that density from the pictures, I think. And he was blown away by the incredible demand. He thought that these homes were going to be, his original goal was sell them for now this was like 10, 12 years ago, $350,000. But there were like bidding wars over this. And he thought it was going to be young families that were buying it. Who was buying these families? They were boomers. They were people who were retiring, and they said they wanted to live in a neighborhood that looked like this. They didn't want to have no big yards that they have to deal with. They have a nice common space, and you always see people out there with like a dog, and the neighbors are chatting and whatever. And I have to say, so there's...
Can't we do this without the state involved though?
You could, if you can get somebody to buy up the land and
you have to follow their rules.
It is a concern that some towns have, which is why not everybody does 40R districts, even though the state gives you payments for it. You can do any of this stuff. I mean, municipalities have the control to do these kinds of things. In my experience, without incentives or requirements, it doesn't usually happen, because changing zoning is can be a difficult process, and a lot of people just don't want to do it with an uncertain outcome.
But if we were going to change it anyway, with the state, you can't just change it and do it privately.
You could. Yes, you could do it privately.
I think you'd still have a lot of builders and developers want to do stuff like this without involving the state.
I think the challenge with that is that what comes first? The property assembly or the rules, right? With 40R, you're putting the rules over a big enough area where it's transparent. Everybody knows what the rules are for a certain area, right? Are you going to just go to somebody's property and say, hey, you know what? We're going to put 7 houses where your 1 house is right now.
If that wasn't 40R.
That's correct. I have to go back and look, because I don't think it was a 40R, but there are 40Rs that are designed to do this kind of thing. You could adopt a 40R district just to do something like this. And you could get then an incentive payment from the state for it.
Yeah, but don't they control the pricing?
No. For under 40R, I'd have to look at the single family homes one, but you do have an affordability requirement, yes. 20% would have to be affordable according to the guidelines for this area.
Did this one that the movers moved into, did that have the affordability program?
This one?
That was market rate.
No, this was all market rate.
It wasn't even qualified for the 8 per acre. Because that would be 56.
Right. But it's close. That's right. Yeah.
But it wouldn't qualify for 40.
Yeah.
That's
a little less. Yeah.
Does 40R have a minimum acreage requirement?
A minimum what?
Acreage.
Oh, acreage?
So let's say there's 15 acres in the center of town to be developed.
Yeah.
Can you take 10 acres and make it 40R, and then 5 acres and make it private?
Yeah, you don't have 40Rs. There have been some small 40R districts. Yes.
I'm asking, what's the minimum?
What's the general minimum?
You know.
It can't exceed 25% of the total land area of your community. So there's an upper threshold, there's not a minimum threshold.
So the thing is, I keep dancing around, you know. I see the vision, I understand the vision, the details lack. There's no details about this. How many acres are we talking about?
We have to map that out.
We
How
don't
would you
know.
say generally, just that, how big's the,
Is
how
that
big's
part of
the
the
area?
survey?
What would you
So
say?
the question is around,
In the process. The next step of the process is delineating the boundaries of how much land we would dedicate to 40R.
so
Who
the-
was it up to?
That's
Rebecca, wasn't that the survey part of
That's
the
your next
survey?
meeting?
It's the next formal meeting of the steering committee will be to look at the survey results and do a mapping exercise that delineates where that boundary is.
When are the survey results supposed to be? I've had difficulty sharing that link.
September 19th.
Yeah, it's very difficult to go on Facebook and share that link. Because I try to share it and they say, you already took the survey.
I will email it to you or
Okay.
to share.
But a lot of people are interested in it and I've heard have not been able to go on.
So just for the purposes of the TV here, so people hear the question. The question was about, is there a minimum acreage to do a 40R district? And the answer is no, or at least I don't think so. I think there is a minimum number of units. I think it has to be 20 or 25 units. Like, you're just not going to get a state incentive payment, like unless it's you're creating at least 25 new units. Like, there's no point in it for the state to do that. Anyways, so
But based on what you showed me, that could be an acre and a half, because you got 20 units an acre on an apartment building.
yes.
So you
Right,
actually-
so I'm just trying to figure out how many acres are involved, how many apartment buildings are we talking about? So the thing is, the vision, the multi-use overlay that you recommend to the planning board says yes. Now we don't know exactly what is going in because there's no details.
But so can I just clarify this? Because maybe I'll help you out just a second here. I think the question is, there's no details to the proposal. And the answer is because this is a process that the community does to design it. And this is the beginning of that process. There's no district, right? There's no concept that's been proposed yet.
There's an old adage, you put the cart before the horse.
But
A cart or a horse?
don't you want to get the feedback from the community about like how big it
I
should
think we
be?
have
I would love to
feedback,
see
yeah.
the details
Yeah.
and beyond the vision. I'm into the vision,
No.
but like I say, you can only put 4 pounds of feathers in a 3-pound bag. And it's just like, I just want to know, I want it, parking. Parking
That's
is an
what I'd
issue.
like to know. Let's say there are 3 or 4 cars.
Sorry, we have a
Where
couple
do
questions,
you
so
put
let's
parking?
go over here and then over there.
Speaking as a town person, like me, like we have a piece of industrial land right behind us, so I'd like that to be changed to something else, because I don't want to see storage units again over here, so that's something we could develop if we changed it. And I'm not speaking for another landowner, but another piece, of course, would be behind the depot where they would put some, restaurants and shops and maybe some small apartments. That's where it would go. That's really like an area that would just fit perfect.
So I guess what I'm getting a sense is doing all this brainstorming that's been going on since April, I guess we're just trying to get a feel of, so where are we talking? I think that it's wonderful to have all this area and stuff like that, but where are we preserving the green space too? That could be a big question for me. What are we preserving? So it is, we're showing us a vision, but I don't think that the residents of East Long Meadow have what the town is thinking of as a vision. So it's like looking at your vision is beautiful, but where's that gonna go in our town and what green spaces are we preserving?
I know there's a question over here.
Yeah, I know.
So actually, it's just 2 comments. The first one is, and I can't tell you the date, but we had a 40R application before the town, or from the town before the state, by a business owner, and it was the depot. It was the land for the depot. And it's 3.5 acres. And it was a very interesting application there. It was rejected. It was rejected.
Rejected by
the state. By the state. Now, it was featured 9/10 of a mile from the most dangerous intersection in East Long Meadow. I mean, that's what.
That's hearsay. sorry, what? I want to see the data.
I have a question. So, the 40R.
Well, sorry, I think there's
Sorry, I
just,
interrupted.
yeah, just,
We have you done?
I am done.
That being said, Rebecca referenced the industrial garden park. Now I know that when we went through the mixed-use village district, the focus was on a 40-acre parcel which is currently abandoned in the industrial garden park. The rest of the park is pretty pristine and it serves a purpose with our community. I hate to use this word, but the founding fathers of this community established a very well-structured industrial garden park for that use. And the criteria is far more specific than our current industrial zone that's down here that we want to make some changes to. That land is pretty sacrosanct in my opinion. You don't want to get rid of industrial garden park property. Don't put your finger up, I'm not done yet.
The purple is
I'm talking
industrial.
about the purple.
Industrial use here.
I'm sorry?
In the center of town.
There's purple down here.
Right. But that's not necessarily.
But you alluded to the fact that it was a possibility, and I just want to set the stage that to get rid of our industrial garden park land, which provides a service to our community, it pays taxes and big taxes, but they don't put children in schools. Yes, their trucks make, ruts in our roads. There are other conditions that we have to be concerned about. That's a piece that really needs to be carefully considered, because if it came to the council, you wouldn't have my support, and I'm sorry about that.
I'm sorry, Mayor. You mean that you don't want
I'm
the
talking-
center town district
No,
getting
I'm
all the way
talking about
into the.
industrial garden park.
Yeah, you don't want it getting all the way down into the industrial garden park.
But the comment was it needs to
We're
be
mostly talking
someplace
about-
where it's not
What's that,
populated
Benton
or
Drive?
congested.
Okay.
That was the comment that was
No, I know. I was clarifying. I was having a hard time.
I'm sorry. Right.
Seems though, we have to tell the people here why we couldn't come up with our own layer, our own deal. But there's an incentive from the state to get cash that goes to the town. Has the town thought about how much that cash is gonna be and what they're gonna use it for?
So it's the next step in the process, because you get a cash incentive based on the capacity of new growth that you're creating. So if we have a small district, we have only X amount of capacity for higher densities, which would have to be delineated in the bylaw. So it's the square footage of the area that we designate, and then the density that we designate that would be the calculation for the cash incentive. And I just want to make it clear, because I feel like the question keeps on coming up. All the state does is review the 40R application and say whether or not we're meeting the criteria that they set forth. And then they give us a cash incentive for the capacity for new growth. And then they give us cash incentives for each unit that's actually built. So we don't even have to build anything before we actually get money in hand. And the state is not involved at all, other than approving the district.
Yeah, and 20% of it has to be affordable housing. I mean, we can't say, oh, it has to be market.
No, it has to be 20%, and just to be clear, 20% market rate housing means that we're building 20% affordable housing means that we're building 80% market rate housing. And affordable housing is 80% the median income, which is around $65,000 per individual. Or for each unit, it's a rent of like $1,600 roughly.
And I just have a quick question. I know someone mentioned in another meeting, has the reimbursement from the state, has that been happening? Because I know a lot of times when the budgets are cut, that doesn't happen. So are those communities like Northampton, all those other places, are they getting that money that the state is saying you're gonna get?
Yeah, there was a time years ago where that was an issue, but I haven't heard anything about it being an issue in a while. And there is also a companion law to Chapter 40R, which is called Chapter 40S. And 40S basically says, if you have a 40R, because a lot of communities were concerned that, oh, this was going to create more cost on the schools, more kids in the school system. 40S basically says, we're going to hold you harmless from that. So if there are additional children in the school system, we're going to reimburse you for that cost.
And that's happened. You're
Yeah.
saying that that's actually happened.
Yes, it has.
Back to my other question, what is the town going to do with the money? Because that seems to be an incentive for this group to use 40 hours. What are we going to do with those dollars? There's got to be some plan for that.
I can't say that there are concrete plans laid out. I could say, like abstractly, it works to, support more infrastructure and tree plantings, or dedicating green land and green spaces in the town and protecting them, perhaps even buying them, creating fields and other amenities that are not necessarily the building and developing of housing.
Possibly fixing the roads.
Hopefully. The cost of roads is so astronomical, like we wouldn't be putting, we wouldn't get enough money to make a large dent in road repair, but of course, sidewalks and roads could be something that we use that money for. It just goes into the general ledger so that we have the ability to.
Rebecca, is that a one-time payment? Or is it annualized?
It's a one-time payment. Whether the state incentive payment, the way that it works is when you pass the zoning, the 40R chapter, and you approve it or adopt it, then you get an incentive payment from the state. And then for every building permit that gets built under that zoning, you get $3,000 per unit. So that happens in the future.
That can't be much compared to the town budget.
Yeah, it's not a lot, and the incentive payments have not been adjusted since they created this, right? So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars.
Right. Yeah. Could be like $500,000.
Yeah, total problem. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Sorry.
I'd like to go back to the picture you have on your screen. There's a community like that has been built on Chestnut Street. I got a abutment notice back in 2005 regarding a 55 and older community. And they're still not complete there. There's maybe 7 foundations to be put in. So it was farmland. I used to run back there. And it, over time, it just developed it. Was 40, anybody know here if 40R was involved with development?
Fields of Chesterfield. No, it was over 55 community. It was local zoning.
They're just condos. They're just private condos.
But I'm just saying, a lot of this stuff would go through the same process as what.
I mean, I can't speak to why that project has not taken off when there is a real need for housing. All I can say is that
there's 7 left, but there's 50 in there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's taken off.
Yeah.
It was in the industrial garden park zone originally.
Yeah.
And they changed to a planned adult residential or?
Planned adult residential.
Yeah.
It was originally residential, then went to industrial garden park, and went back to residential.
That was town vote, right? Yeah.
Yes, town meeting.
Yeah.
So I just was wondering if that example of that process, the history of that project is going to come into play with this development.
I don't think they're apples and apples.
Yes, sir.
Are they going to be exempt from the extra money that we're going to have to be paying on our taxes for the new school? Are they going to be exempt from that? Are they going to have to
No,
pay?
I mean, they would be regular residents of the
Yeah,
town.
So, my house will be about $1,500 a year more for 30 years. Of course, I don't have to worry about it for 30 years. But is that all going to, I mean, they're also going to have to be taxed on whatever?
Yes. So the question is whether these new residents, if they do live in a 40R district, would be regular taxpayers, and the answer is yes. And so the benefit for existing residents is that you get to divide those bills by more people, and your bill hopefully will be less. Yes.
For a town this size, any idea of the sweet spot for density per acre, just roughly, something we should strive to make, or that's reasonable in our community?
I think it depends really on getting back to this idea of vision, right? like what is it that you want to accomplish in your town center? Do you want to have a place where you can have like attract some young professionals to live, and do you want to like have more restaurants and shops? I mean, I don't know. If you're not looking for that and you're looking just for like maybe some different kinds of single family homes, then you're going to have a different kind of a 40R and a different kind of a development. I think, I think most towns in Massachusetts, including Longmeadow, could do things like this, right? You could have what's called cottage developments or smaller homes, just to give a different kind of options.
But I fear the cost of these would be much more than what we're trying to achieve is places that are not affordable housing, but are affordable folks to live in.
Yes, and you're exactly right about that. What I haven't said, and again, this is a different part of the state. It's still not close to Boston, but it's a different part of the state. I was just looking. The guy, I remember talking to the developer, 10, 12 years ago, and he was trying to sell these for $350,000 to like new families, and who ended up buying them. There were like bidding wars at like over $500,000 for older people who were coming in and downsizing. And I just looked when I was putting this together, yesterday, and I saw on the market a home for $1.2 million, one of these homes. These are not big homes, and they have like no yard. So I'm just, and I'm not saying that's
six
great.
per acre, right? These are like 6 per acre. There's 7 acres, 42 units.
Yeah.
We're talking, we should be in the 20. And it sounds like a large number, but we're trying to achieve something, and that's not it, in my opinion. I love it. I would live there. But that doesn't achieve what we're lacking in this community, which is places that people can afford to live.
Yeah.
So we need 20 units per acre. Maybe.
And it's not my job to tell you like what that is. That's really your vision for your community and what you want. That's your that's a discussion.
What I want is places that people can afford to live in this town.
Yeah.
And that isn't it. So tell me how I get someone to have a place that's $1,200, $1,400 a month.
Right, and that could be. I think the 20% affordability, for example, some people might see that as a negative. Other people might see that as a positive, because if you do something like this totally market rate, the market is just going to it took off. They're $1.2 million for these homes now. These are not starter homes anymore, right? And so if you're trying to create homes that, your kids or your teachers, your firefighters can live in, then you might want to try doing some different kinds of things. And maybe a 40R is not bad because you have to have the 20%.
Andre, could I ask? I like that vision.
Yeah.
And the other vision, let's say, I'm thinking ahead, all right? So this is a plan that they bring to the planning board based on, let's say that's 40R.
Yeah.
And they're going to do those single family housing, 8 per acre. Does the planning board, because it's within the 40R purview, is it like stamped, okay? As opposed to some other developer comes in and says, I want to put up units 20 per acre. I mean, I guess if they're competing, can a planning board decide that no, it's within 40R, but I don't like concept.
You can have, it's just, you control your local zoning, including the 40R. So you could have a 40R district that could have like a 8 dwelling unit densities, maybe designed for something like this. And then maybe you could have another part that's a little bit bigger, designed for like a 3-4 story apartment.
But I guess my question is, if a developer came in and said, I want to do 20 acres, because that's what's available, and I want to put apartments up, 28,
yeah, no,
it's
can't do
within
that.
40R, does the planning board, why would they say no?
Well, it depends. You're setting the rules. You're setting the 40R rules.
The town of East Longmeadow.
The town of East Longmeadow.
Yeah. This district that we're about to create.
Via the steering board's recommendation.
Whatever we create, which means it has to go through planning board and it has to go through the town council. Just like once we create the 40R, there are no options anymore. It's whatever we create.
But are those the details that regulate the 40R?
Correct. We make them.
So you
I've heard that before.
The town of East Longmeadow.
But the steering committee is going to recommend those details, isn't it?
We're all going to recommend to the steering committee.
So
then we're going to build this bylaw.
So does the steering committee recommend something, what I guess we're saying, can the planning board then change it a little bit? Or not?
Yeah, we can.
They could say, well,
Yeah.
no, we don't want, and then the town
Yep.
council could go back and say, no, we don't like it that way, it's too
Correct.
dense, and they push it back. So
Correct.
it's
Still
still town
strong.
control. Okay, all
Yes.
right.
And your whole
Correct.
steering committee is town residents, just to be
Yes,
clear.
I-
There's nobody.
I do know that.
No. I don't think, like he said, the state is not in charge of
That's
our
more
zoning,
40B.
even if we do 40R.
40B would be
It's
more
all
state
yeah,
control.
correct.
Yeah.
I have a honest question, because some people have brought this up. We need affordable housing in East Long Meadow. I've heard that more than once. But it seems like no matter when a development goes in, or a house goes up, no matter what it costs here in East Long Meadow, it's getting bought. You're getting a bid anymore. So how are we saying that we're having an issue with affordable housing when the houses are being bought up? People are buying them.
Right.
But they can't afford it though. So my two daughters, when they want to come back to East Long Meadow, they have no options. There's no way they can come back to this town right out of college, right? We need somewhere that costs $1,200 a month, $1,400 a month. The only way we achieve it, I believe, is high density. You need 3 floors, 20 units in a building. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's the only way we're getting to affordable. Because to your point, you put something up, people bid it, it goes up. People want to live here. It's a place to live.
Well, I'd love to live back in Rhine, New Hampshire right now, but I can't afford it. You know what I mean? So I had to go somewhere else. So
There's also
there's choices you make.
next year it's going to be a reality for a lot more people when we have to start paying for a new high school.
For what?
A new high school.
Oh, right.
When those bills really start to come home to roost, a lot of people will not be able to afford to stay in their homes. A lot.
So you
Like
have to
glaringly
make,
a lot.
so then you have to make sure whatever you're building then isn't gonna be, so right now,
There's
there's
an
a lot
affordable
of, okay.
component.
So I'm an elk, okay? We own our house.
Yep.
We live in a small house. All we have to pay is real estate taxes. So you have to make sure that in order, so we want to maybe move to something smaller, then you'd have to make sure that that housing unit or whatever you have is less than what we're paying already. So that's,
Right.
because there are a lot of small homes around the center.
And that's
I
where
mean,
the
yeah.
creation of
That are-
all the rules in this district, whether it's 40R or something we create by ourselves,
Yeah.
that all has to come into play. And that's exactly why we're having all these conversations, because all of these ideas matter. And they're all going to go into whatever our finished product is.
And Cal, just add by saying there's a lack of affordability because there's a lack of housing diversity. We only have single-family homes for the most part in all of East Long Meadow, unless you're in a senior living, multifamily dwelling building. This is for seniors. But other than a senior living multi-unit development, we only have single-family detached homes.
But that ADU might be an issue too.
Well,
Bring
there's
that
that.
up again, that's a huge issue all of a sudden.
That's another issue.
Yes, sir.
we need to
Yeah.
Listen.
A couple of things. We're talking about affordable housing, but also, as our town manager mentioned, the real estate, the property taxes are gonna go up. So we have to look at that. Can you afford to pay the property taxes?
Yep.
Second, is there a limit on the size of the property that you can include in 40R? Half an acre? Can you go down smaller than just an acre?
Right. It depends on what kind of a district you're talking about, right? So I could see, for example, just given what I've heard tonight, and what I've seen from the town center in East Longmeadow, it kind of depends on your vision, right? So some people might have a vision where you want to have maybe you want a few more restaurants and shops in town. In order to support that, you need more apartments. You need apartments nearby, right? So you might want to have you might want to have like the 3-story apartments in a few places, right? Kind of start to create that town center look, a place where it's walkable. Then maybe on the outskirts of that, you do something like this, which is kind of like a buffer towards, heading towards the other single family homes with the larger yards and the bigger lots. That's, what you can do as part of a plan. But you got to think a little bit about, take a look at the land that's there and say, how far do you want to go out? How many properties do you think you want to be part of this planning effort? And I think you have to do that, create that vision before you actually start talking about a 40R district, because my experience with any zoning change is that when a town comes out and presents a zoning change without having gone through the process of getting the vision from the community, people go bananas because you're like, what? You're changing the rules, what I can do with my property, like without talking to me. So I think they're trying to do the right thing by having those conversations first.
One thing, how does conservation come into this? Because we have a brook pretty much going right through the center of town. Would that play into what you can put in the center of town?
I'm sorry, what going through?
We have a brook.
A brook, yeah.
With conservation and laws, would that hinder any development in the center of town?
I don't know, but I believe, I have to double check to see how the Conservation Commission rules. I don't know whether you look at those rules when you're creating the 40R or if it's still a project by project review once the 40R is done. I'm not certain about that.
Maybe we take one more question and let you.
Okay.
Yeah. We have vacated properties now. I can name one that's been vacated for decades, well, half a century. And it's been sitting there like that, and there's big X's on it. Then they come in. And when I first learned about what the town wants to do, they should seriously think about what to do with the property.
Yeah.
There's two like that, and I just can't remember if it was occupied when we moved here in 2000. So I can't imagine doing this big project and leapfrogging over existing structures and property to accomplish these steps, the next steps here. And I'm referring to Carlin and it was once Pratt & Whitney and Package Machinery. So they left their wares behind, their resources behind, and the town didn't do anything to make them responsible for taking it away. Have you dealt with any towns that have vacated properties?
Yes,
and then
actually.
Also
I actually have a bunch more slides here, but my next slide.
You're a resource here for the town and consulting, so I'd like to know what you have done for such challenges.
So your local zoning laws are basically the rules of what people can do with their property. And so if they can't do much with their property, they can only put a single family home for every acre on it, it has a certain value because you know what the value of a single family home is. If you change the zoning rules and you allow more development in those properties, there's more value you're creating. Just like I showed you with that, that's why you get more property taxes, because it's a more valuable property, you can build more homes or whatever it is that you allow to be built there. So that is part of what you want to take into account. If there are vacant properties that haven't moved in a long time, if you, what's called upzone them, so you can do more with those properties, they're going to become more valuable and they may get more interest from developers or investors. This is an example of something that similar to what you're talking about. In the town of Easton, this is the old Ames shovel factory, right? Ames is a Massachusetts company, born in Easton. This is the old original factory there. Beautiful old factory buildings, but sat vacant for a long time. And this came in and this is a 25% affordable. This is actually what's called a friendly 40B. So the developer used the 40B, but they did it by working with the town and saying, here, we want to work with you. We don't want to come in as an adversary. We want to develop in this place. We're willing to do the 25% affordable units. You say you need those affordable units. And so, let's work together to get that done. And they designed it together. So you can use 40B in a very constructive way as well on a project by project basis. But I think this sort of illustrates just what you're talking about, where it created value where there wasn't value before.
Elected officials need to seriously consider doing something with that property. Well, that's
yeah. I mean, we own Carlin, so I hope Carlin is in this district, whatever we create, and somebody can do something with it. The town owns Carlin Combustion.
Last meeting, one of the town officials
No,
No?
we own the property.
Is all the dirt toxic that has to be cleaned up?
There is some, not at the site. There's a lot of contaminated dirt in the building, and yes, the building will probably have to be raised. But again,
Well, that makes sense.
yeah,
But there is state funding, what's called brownfields
Right.
funding, that town can get for those
we
kinds of cleanups.
got a grant application going in November. Stop filling all my puzzles. Well, this is the overarching thing with our zoning. We had a viable project at 330 Chestnut Street. That was a by right use, and it got turned down. Right? People don't want a warehouse. This is why we want the industrial zone out of the center of town. I don't want one in the center either.
Well, let me show you one more example that might be relevant for you guys. So this is an old plaza on Cape Cod, which got turned into Mashpee Commons, right? Beautiful transformation. This is an award-winning project. This can happen in places like East Longmeadow. You have to just decide. This is creating a landscape where, for example, the gentleman over there was talking about a 20-unit density per acre. That fits in perfectly. You could easily put another floor on top of that. Yeah, and this is mixed use because they wanted to create a town center. They did not have a town center, and they turned that plaza into it. There's lots of kind of what we call sprawl, that can be used for this kind of stuff too. Everywhere, every community has it. Anyways, and then I just had some nice pictures of the kinds of, images of the kinds of places that you could have when you create that sort of density, because you can support different kinds of shops and restaurants. You can do things like, this is North Adams, they created this really cool beach in the summertime for a little while. Brought a ton of people to it. Every community, this is New Bedford, you can use art and create a unique sense of place geared for your community. Do cool things like,
Whoa, 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 whoa!
Yeah.
I
love this.
Let's do that. Maryland.
Only have
The Rotary.
Oh, you can't see the Rotary?
Yeah, I know.
We take a picture for Maryland. We take a picture for Maryland. Here's the new Rotary.
But this was something, I don't know where this was.
So this is actually out west. I think this is a place in Oregon. They pioneered this. But I can tell you, when I worked in the city of New Bedford with some community groups there, they had a very busy street. On one side was a big park that was right on the harbor. And then on the other side was the Portuguese neighborhood. And so all the families and the kids had to cross this very busy street. And so we worked with some local artists to do this exact same kind of concept. And the artist, worked with local youth and other folks and created kind of a mosaic of Portuguese white and blue murals. And so now everybody knows where to cross the street. And because if you're a car coming towards it, you slow down automatically. You got to give those kind of visual cues. So, and then obviously, little markets, and you can create with very little amounts of space. This is in a parking space. You can create little seating areas outside. Create little places for people to come together. This is all very possible, so that's it. And feel free to stay in touch or get in touch if there's anything I can be helpful with.